My name is Eleanor Whitcomb. I'm 44 years old, and I teach high school biology at a school in the East End of Toronto, the kind of teacher who keeps a drawer of granola bars for kids who come in without breakfast. The manager at the credit union looked at his screen, then at me, then back at his screen, and said, "Mrs. Whitcomb, are you aware there's a little over $31 million in an account under your name?" I asked him to repeat that. I wasn't being dramatic. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him over the hum of the branch's ventilation system, the way you mishear a name at a loud party. He didn't repeat it right away. He picked up his phone and called someone else over, a woman in a gray blazer, who introduced herself as the assistant manager, and the two of them looked at my ID, looked at my account, and looked at me like I might be about to faint. I did not faint. I sat very still in that little vinyl chair on Bloor Street and asked for a glass of water, and while he went to get it, I thought about my husband, and I thought, quietly and without wanting to, "Marcus, what did you do?" That morning, I hadn't gone to the credit union for anything glamorous. My furnace had died in February, which in this country is not a small emergency, and I needed $4,000 to get it fixed before the pipes froze. I'd gone in expecting a short conversation about a line of credit. I left with a folder of documents I didn't understand and a headache that lasted 3 days. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without Marcus. Marcus Whitcomb was my husband for 19 years. We met at a curling bonspiel in Barrie when I was 24 and he was 28, and what struck me about him from the very first conversation was how little he needed to say. Some men fill silence because they're afraid of it. Marcus filled silence with silence, comfortably, the way some people hum. He worked in commercial insurance underwriting, a job so unglamorous that when people asked what he did at parties, their eyes would glaze over before he finished the sentence, and he liked that. He liked being underestimated. I understand that about him better now than I did when he was alive. We built an ordinary life in the beaches, a narrow brick semi with a maple tree out front that turned the whole street orange in October. Marcus handled the finances, not because I couldn't. I balanced my own classroom budget for 20 years and never came up short. But because it was simply the shape our marriage took early on, and neither of us questioned it. "You worry about the kids at school," he used to say. "I'll worry about the RRSPs. I let him. That is the sentence I have turned over the most times since." When Marcus died, a stroke, sudden, on a Tuesday in April while he was raking the last of the leaves that had blown in over winter, I stopped being a functioning person for a while. Grief in real life doesn't look like the movies. It looks like standing in the cereal aisle at the Loblaws on Queen Street, holding a box of oatmeal, unable to remember if I already had oatmeal at home, unable to remember for a full minute what day it was. That's when my brother-in-law stepped in. Marcus had one sibling, a younger brother named Dominic Whitcomb. And Dominic had a wife, Renee, who I'd always found pleasant enough in the low-effort way you find your husband's sibling's spouse pleasant at Christmas dinners. They drove down from Barrie the week after the funeral with a lasagna and a great deal of tenderness, and Renee sat across from me at my own kitchen table and said, "Eleanor, honey, you shouldn't have to think about money right now. Let Dominic just keep an eye on things, just until you're steady again." I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was a woman who couldn't remember whether she owned oatmeal. Dominic had himself added as a co-signer on the accounts Marcus had left behind, the joint checking, the small investment account at the credit union, the modest RRSP. just administrative acts across the table, with the easy confidence of a man who sells cars for a living, which incidentally he did. I signed where he pointed. I did not read carefully. I was 43 years old and grieving, and I did not read carefully. And that is a sentence I still have not fully forgiven myself for, even now, even knowing everything I know. The months passed the way months do after a death, slowly and then all at once. I kept teaching because staring at my classroom whiteboard was, strangely, easier than staring at my own living room. Dominic and Renee called on my birthday at Thanksgiving, always with that particular warmth that people perform when they need to be seen performing it. I took it at face value. Why wouldn't I? The first thread came loose about 7 months in. My friend Priya Nair, who I'd taught alongside for over a decade, had been gently pushing me for months to update my will now that I was on my own. And I finally booked an appointment with a lawyer named Deborah Coyle, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with an office above a dental clinic in the Danforth. She asked me to bring a summary of my assets. I dug out the accordion folder Marcus had kept, labeled in his blocky engineer's handwriting, household. Statements, the mortgage discharge, our life insurance policy. The numbers were smaller than I expected. Not catastrophically. I told myself the market had had a rough year, told myself I was misremembering what Marcus used to say about our retirement targets, but smaller. A cold, small feeling settled behind my ribs and stayed there. I started noticing things differently after that appointment. Dominic's new truck, a loaded F-150, he definitely hadn't been driving at Christmas the year before. Renee's Instagram, a week in Puerto Vallarta, a long weekend in Whistler. A new kitchen renovation with quartz countertops that looked like they cost more than my furnace and my roof combined. When I mentioned lightly that I was thinking of meeting with an independent financial advisor, Dominic's voice on the phone dropped exactly 1 degree of warmth. Just 1. But I'd spent 2 decades reading 17-year-olds who were lying about missed assignments. I noticed. Then came the Tuesday at the credit union, 11 months after Marcus died. I'd gone in for the furnace loan. Instead, a manager named Gerald Atcheby typed my name into his system, went quiet, excused himself, came back with the assistant manager, and told me that I was the sole beneficiary and named account holder of an investment trust holding just over $31 million, opened years earlier under the name M. Whitcomb Legacy Trust. Administered through a private wealth division I had never once heard of in 19 years of marriage. Marcus had never mentioned it, not once. Not in the folder labeled household, not in any paperwork Dominic had ever shown me while keeping an eye on things. I drove home barely registering the streetcars on Bloor. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Renee had once offered to help me, and I opened my laptop, and by 1 in the morning I had a legal pad covered in my own cramped handwriting and a picture that made my stomach hurt. From the accounts Dominic had access to, roughly $290,000 had moved over 11 months in ways I could not explain. Transfers to a numbered company. Administrative fees that appeared with no service behind them. Small enough each time that no single transaction looked alarming. $290,000 that should have been mine bled out quietly while I was too underwater in my own grief to notice. And here was the thing that actually frightened me. Dominic didn't know about the $31 million. If he had, he would have gone after it immediately and completely. Marcus had hidden that trust so thoroughly that even his own brother, who'd had his hands in every account he could reach, had missed the largest one entirely. Marcus had built me a wall I didn't know existed. If I marched over to Dominic's place in Barrie tomorrow and confronted him, I would be handing a starving man a map to a bank vault. I didn't sleep that night. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in the bed Marcus and I had shared for 19 years, I felt something in me shift from grief into something colder and steadier. Marcus had built this quietly, carefully, the way he did everything, and he had never made a fuss about anything in his life. He'd left this for me. I was going to keep it, and I was going to make sure Dominic answered for what he'd already taken. The plan I made over the following week was not dramatic. There were no confrontations, no dramatic phone calls. It was the plan of a woman who had spent 20 years managing a classroom of teenagers and understood that the best way to protect something fragile is to say absolutely nothing about it until you're ready. Step 1. Tell Dominic and Renee nothing. Our relationship on the surface would stay exactly as warm and ordinary as it had always been. Step 2. Find a lawyer who handled fraud, not wills. Deborah Coyle was wonderful, but this needed teeth of a different kind. She referred me, within a day, to a man named Anthony Baptiste, a financial litigation lawyer with an office in a converted warehouse near King and Spadina. Step 3. Get certified records, not my own copies, straight from the institutions, quietly, using my legal right as sole account holder. Step 4. Move the $31 million trust into a structure Dominic could never touch, before he had any chance to learn it existed. I wrote it all on the legal pad, tore the page out, folded it twice, and tucked it inside my copy of Anne of Green Gables on the bookshelf. The last place anyone in that family would ever think to look, since none of them had read a book in years that wasn't a car brochure. Anthony Baptiste's office had thick carpet and a wall of unfussy diplomas. He was maybe 50, unhurried, the kind of man who took off his glasses before he said anything important. I laid everything out. The trust, the folder, the $290,000 I couldn't account for. He listened without interrupting, put his glasses back on, and said, "Mrs. Whitcomb, this may well be a criminal matter. I need certified records going back to the date your husband passed. Not copies, certified. How do I get those without Dominic finding out?" "Because you are the sole account holder," he said. "He has no legal right to be notified. And frankly, based on what you're describing, I doubt he was ever granted proper power of attorney in the first place. What he has is a signature you gave him during the worst month of your life." That landed harder than I expected. The certified records took 12 days. In that window, something shifted with Dominic. Maybe he'd caught wind of my meeting with Deborah. Maybe it was pure animal instinct, but that Friday he called me sweetheart, a word he had never once used with me in 19 years of knowing him. "Just checking in on you," he said. "Thinking maybe I come by next week, go over some of the account paperwork, routine stuff." "Of course," I said, keeping my voice as light as the maple leaves outside my window. "Anytime." The records came back on a Tuesday. Anthony spent 40 minutes with them while I looked at his diplomas, and then he set them down and said, "Eleanor, since your husband passed, $286,000 moved from your accounts through management fees and direct transfers into a numbered company registered to Dominic Whitcomb. That company shows no evidence of ever providing you any actual service. And the transfers were structured, never over $9,000 at a time, which suggests a deliberate effort to stay under reporting thresholds FINTRAC would flag." "Is that a crime?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Structuring transactions to evade reporting is a serious offense under Canadian law, he said. And that's before we get to the fact that whatever you signed at that kitchen table was very likely obtained through misrepresentation while you were in a documented state of grief. We filed the civil claim on a Thursday in late June, and Anthony sent formal notice to Dominic by registered mail. He knew by Friday. He called at 8 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. His voice on the message was tight and controlled in a way I'd never heard from him. Eleanor, I got something in the mail I think is a huge misunderstanding. Call me back before you talk to anyone else. I forwarded the voicemail to Anthony. I did not call back. They showed up at my door on Saturday. Dominic and Renee. No warning. Renee carrying an actual casserole dish like it was 1974. I met them on the porch with my gardening gloves still on and did not invite them in. We need to talk, Eleanor, Dominic said, voice doing that wounded warm thing. You should have called first, I said. My lawyer handles communication now. His face did something small and involuntary, a tightening around the eyes. If you go through with this, you're going to tear this family apart. Marcus would be devastated. He trusted me. With what? I said. Say it clearly. What exactly did Marcus trust you with? He didn't answer that. Renee put her hand on his arm, and I watched the two of them recalibrate in real time, the way people do when the script they rehearsed on the drive down doesn't fit the scene. We can make this go away quietly, Dominic said finally, dropping the wounded act entirely, his voice flattening into something honest for the first time in the whole conversation. You don't understand what becomes public in a case like this. Your name, Marcus's name. My lawyer will be in touch, I said, and went inside and locked the door, and sat on my kitchen floor for a good 10 minutes because my legs simply refused to hold me up any longer. Not from fear exactly, more from the sheer physical cost of standing still while someone tried to shake you. A settlement offer arrived 2 weeks later through a lawyer named Harvey Struthers. $110,000 paid quietly in exchange for dropping everything and signing a non-disclosure agreement. I read it twice at my kitchen table and thought about $110,000 against $286,000 stolen against $31 million secured. And I thought about 11 months of being handled by two people who were counting on my grief to make me agreeable. I forwarded it to Anthony with one line, "Please decline." They filed a counterclaim, predictably, arguing the paperwork I'd signed was a valid disclosed management agreement. Anthony was not worried. The disclosure clause is on page 9 of a 12-page document written above a grade 10 reading level that you signed 4 days after your husband's funeral, he told me. We'll address it. My sister, Fiona Doyle, flew in from Calgary the moment I called her and told her everything. She sat at my table for 20 minutes without saying a word, reading through the folder Anthony and I had built, and then said, "Dominic sat at Mom and Dad's Christmas table for 15 years. Then she stayed for a week, reorganized my filing system alphabetically because that's how she copes with things, and cooked every night, and the house had warmth in it again for the first time since April." Dominic and Renee came back in September, this time with a call first, asking to sit down as family, no lawyers. Anthony was clear. I could meet them, but I shouldn't discuss the case, and I should have a witness. I asked Fiona to sit in. They arrived dressed carefully. Renee in soft, humble colors with no jewelry, Dominic in a button-down with no tie, the whole visual grammar of sincerity. Dominic saw Fiona in the armchair by the window, and his expression flickered. He clearly hadn't planned for a witness. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, leaning forward, elbows on knees. "And looking back, maybe some of what we did, in trying to help you, didn't look right. We should have been more transparent." Transparent. 11 months of structured payments into a numbered company, and the word he reached for was transparent. "Is that really what Marcus would have wanted?" Renee added, her voice trembling on cue. "All this legal fighting, dragging his name through it. We're family, Eleanor." I thought about Marcus's blocky handwriting, his quiet certainty that things would work out if you left them alone, the wall he'd built for me without telling anyone. "I think Marcus would have wanted me protected," I said pleasantly, "which is why he left me everything." Dominic's jaw tightened. "You need to think carefully about what pursuing this means. Our lawyer thinks the agreement you signed has a real chance of holding up. If a judge sides with us, you could lose standing to contest any of it. And there are things that could come out in discovery you might not want out. About how your husband structured that trust in the first place and why he never told you. If you had something that could actually hurt my case," I said, "your lawyer would already have used it. You're bringing it up here, in my living room, without him present, because it doesn't exist. It's a threat wearing a suggestion's clothes." The room went very quiet. Renee reached across the coffee table and put her hand over mine, eyes conveniently wet. "We just don't want this for you, Eleanor. All this stress, we could figure it out between ourselves quietly." I moved my hand away, stood up, and said, "Anthony's office will be in touch about discovery." That ended the meeting. The discovery process over the following months unraveled Dominic's numbered company entirely. It had been registered a full year before Marcus died, and had never once billed another client in its existence. A forensic accountant Anthony brought in, a precise, unshakable woman named Priscilla Odom, built a chart of 43 separate transfers. Every single one kept just under the federal reporting threshold. A pattern, her report stated plainly, consistent with deliberate structuring. At his examination for discovery, Dominic could not produce a single email, text, or letter where he'd ever disclosed a fee to me. Not once in 11 months. His lawyer's face did not change when that came out, which was its own kind of answer. They came back with a new offer after that, $190,000. I said no again. By then, the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center had opened a file based on the structuring pattern, entirely separate from my civil case, and Anthony told me plainly that a settlement wouldn't make that go away. The choice in front of me had narrowed to something very simple. Fight for everything, or take less than half of what was stolen and let the rest play out anyway. I chose the trial. It ran 3 days in a courtroom in downtown Toronto. Priscilla Odom testified for nearly 2 hours, calm and exact, walking judge through 43 transfers without a single embellishment. I testified for 40 minutes, described signing papers 4 days after my husband's funeral, described a phone call about routine paperwork that arrived the same week I'd requested my records. I said the true thing, once clearly and nothing more. When Dominic took the stand, his lawyer asked him to name one other client his numbered company had ever served. He couldn't. The silence after that question sat in the room for what felt like a full 5 seconds, and everyone understood exactly what it meant. The judge, a measured woman named Justice Adeyes Nwatsu, took 2 days to rule. full judgment in my favor, the $286,000, pre-judgment interest, punitive damages for what she called a deliberate and calculated exploitation of a grieving widow, and legal costs. All told, just over $700,000. Fintrack's file, separately, led to Dominic being charged under the Proceeds of Crime Act. He pleaded guilty the following spring and was sentenced to 14 months, with restitution ordered on top of what the civil judgment had already secured. Renee received probation and a fine. Having cooperated with investigators once it became clear Dominic wasn't taking the fall alone. I retired from teaching the following June, once the whole process had finally lifted off my shoulders. My students gave me a card with flowers drawn on it and a note from a girl named Priyanka that said Mrs. Whitcomb's garden, because I used to talk about my maple tree so much they teased me for it. I kept that card on my kitchen counter for a month. The first thing I did with any of the money was fix the furnace, the very thing I'd walked into that credit union for in the first place. Then I set up a small bursary at my old school in Marcus's name for a graduating student going into the trades, because he always said university wasn't the only path worth respecting. I kept the house on the tree-lined street. I had the back garden redone, roses along a gravel path. Fiona helped me choose one Saturday morning, kneeling in the dirt saying nothing profound at all, which was exactly right. I traveled a little that fall, 2 weeks in Nova Scotia I'd never properly seen despite living in this country my whole life, and I went alone and found I liked it more than I expected to. I still don't know exactly how Marcus built that trust without a single soul finding out, not even his own brother, but I think he understood something about grief and vulnerability that I didn't understand about myself until I had to live through it. He built a wall around me before he ever knew he'd need to. I am 46 now. I tend my garden. I think about Marcus most days, and I sign absolutely nothing ever again without reading every single word first.